Hi, I know there's a storm coming, so I'll keep this short. I'd mentioned in class this week that I was going to try to do a webcast every Friday on what I call a practical issue for that week. So this week's big pragmatic question is about corporate governance. What's corporate governance? It's about who runs a company, who keeps an eye on who runs a company. So here are the three basic questions you'd like to answer when you look at the corporate governance of public companies. First is who runs this company? Who are the top managers? How did they get there? The CEO, the CFO, etc. Did they get there from going up the ranks, or were they hired from outside? Second, you're going to look at who monitors these managers. And you can start with the board of directors. Who's on the board? Are they the board that's likely to be a rubber stamp? Or are they a board of directors that will actually ask tough questions? If your company is a regulated company, a bank, an insurance company, it is possible that there are regulatory authorities keeping an eye on the managers. Though as we've seen in these last few years, they don't actually keep a very good eye. Third, if the company is a publicly traded company, there are equity investors who are interested in the company, analysts who track the company. Again, it's not clear how well they do this, but analysts try to make sense of what the company is doing and pass judgment on it. And if the company has borrowed money, it's got bondholders or banks or lenders. In some cases, especially if they have corporate bonds issued, they also have a ratings agency to answer to. So in a sense, there are multiple entities trying to monitor managers, though not always successfully. You're also going to look at what the rules for the game are. In what sense? You're looking to see how rigged the game is against you. As stockholders in a public company, is the game rigged against you? And if there are inside stockholders, founders, owners who continue to own significant amounts of stock and often run the company, is the game rigged in their favor? So those are the questions you'd like to try to address, and those are the questions I'm going to try to answer in a pragmatic way in this webcast. The first place I start when I'm trying to address these questions for a company is the company's own reports. I start with the annual report. I look for that page where they list out the board of directors. I know much of what they say about the directors is PR. It doesn't tell me much about them, but it's good to start with that. And I look for a couple of, and I'm actually surprised at how much information you can find out about directors from just that page. I also stay on in the annual report and I look for what most companies have in annual reports now, a mission statement. Again, for many companies, it's pablum. It means absolutely nothing. But at least you get a sense of what the company sees as its objectives/objectives. And finally, if I can, in some annual reports, I try to find corporate governance principles. And companies increasingly either put this in the annual report or on their website. Take a look at it if they have them. What do they tell you about what the company thinks about corporate governance? Again, don't believe everything you read there, but it's a good place to start. I also look for filings with regulatory authorities. It's a US company, it has to make filings with the SEC, and there are dozens and dozens of filings. The filing that I find most useful when I think about corporate governance is a filing called the DEF 14A. Leave it to the SEC to come up with completely unintuitive ways of listing these filings. What does that filing contain? It contains useful information about conflicts of interest and voting rights and how corporate governance is structured within a company. So see if you can find that filing and take a look at it. It's not easy reading. Nothing filed with the SEC is. HP, for instance, has a 14 def filing which is almost 140 pages long. So be willing for a slog, but you might be surprised at what you can pick up along the way. With non-US companies, things get a little more difficult because the regulatory authorities might not be as easy to find. You might not be able to go to a website and pull up the data. But in many countries, there is the equivalent of the SEC. In some companies, when you go to the country, you might find that there are no regulatory authorities collecting this information. That absence of information is often more revealing than anything this company might let you know. What do I mean by that? Well, think of the question you're trying to answer. How much power do I as a stockholder have over this company, right? If you cannot find basic information about who sits in the board of directors and potential conflicts of interest, how much power do you think you have? I don't think you have much. So view that as information that you will use to try to answer the bigger questions. When you look at the board, here are some of the things you might want to look at. First, look to see how big the board is. We talked about these mega boards, 15, 20, 25 members. See if the board is a big board or a reasonably sized board. Look at the directors. I don't mean to be discriminating based on age, but if you have 12 directors all over the age of 85, this board of directors is probably not exactly able to hang in there for a 2-hour meeting. Look to see how long these directors have been on the board. If you've got directors who've been on the board 25, 30, 35 years, well, I think you're more likely to be looking at a rubber stamp board. Look at the background of the board members. Do they have the background to ask tough questions of the managers? If you have a technology company, you like to see people on the board who've actually worked with technology companies or worked at technology companies before. Okay? You also want to see if there are any information about connections between the director and the company. So has this person worked for the company before as a consultant, as a supplier? And also with the CEO. Is this director the CEO's second cousin or neighbor? It might be difficult to sometimes dig out that information, but if you can, it's useful information. You also want to get information about how the board operates. I mean, who chairs the board? The CEO chairs the board. That's a strike against corporate governance. How often does the board meet? Some boards meet more often than others, but also check to see whether you can find out information on board attendance. How many directors actually show up at meetings? Enron, for instance, had this reputation for having board meetings where most directors were not there, and you saw the net end result of what happened as a consequence. And also, and this is the most critical part, see if you can find any information about the effectiveness of the board. On Wednesday, I mentioned that independent boards don't always equate to effective boards. An effective board is one that asks tough questions of managers, keeps them on their toes. So see if you can find any evidence that this board of directors that you're looking at has actually done that in the past. Look at news stories to see if they at least slow down the top managers when they get started. As for investor analyst activity, on the buy side, start off by looking at who the biggest stockholders are in your company. You can get that on Yahoo Finance. You can pull it off Bloomberg, and I'll give you a link next week to pull that off. And then follow up by looking at who's on that list. So if you see Fidelity and State Street and BlackRock, don't be surprised. They're on many lists. But then ask yourself a follow-up question. What's the history of this investor in terms of corporate governance? Do they ask tough questions of managers when they're not happy? Or do they sell and move on? On the sell side, see if you can track down the analysts who follow this company. How many are there? And what do they think about the company? And that again is public information. You can get the mix of buy and sell recommendations on a company very easily by going to multiple sites, and most of them are free. And if you can, see if there are any activist investors involved in the company. Activist investors are investors you probably heard about, the Carl Icahns, the Bill Ackmans, and you probably read about David Einhorn at Apple yesterday. But these are investors who hold enough stock, but also are pains in the neck. They're pains in the neck for managers. They ask them tough questions. They don't always push for the right things, but they rock the boat. And as an individual investor, that might be a good thing for you. Finally, check out the rules of the game. And one of the first things you need to check out is if there are common shares. Are there different rules for different folks? The voting rights different for different shares. So if you buy shares in Facebook, you know the game is already structured against you. So look to see if there are multiple classes with different voting rights. Also check to see if there are golden shares. What are golden shares? These are unusual in the US, but a lot of government-owned companies that went public in the 1980s, the government retained a share in these companies, which allowed them veto power over big decisions, acquisitions, investing, moving abroad. And they did it for a lot of different reasons. But if you're an investor in a company where the government has a golden share, that essentially is a strike against your power to run the company. Also, if you can dig through the corporate charter, I know it's painful, and find information about first whether there are anti-takeover amendments, clauses in the contract, whether it specifies what the voting rules are, making it more difficult or easier for you to vote against incumbent managers, and what the rules are for nominating directors. I think that's useful to know as well, because in a sense, that'll let you assess how much power you'll have as a company. So let me very quickly take you through the process of how I would try to pull this information off. And let me use one company as my example. I pulled up one of the companies I've been interested in for the last few weeks, especially in the aftermath of their disastrous write-offs, is HP. I mean, clearly in hindsight, the corporate governance of this company is not a strong suit. But I went in and pulled up the annual report for HP. And if you look down the annual report, you'll actually find information about the directors very early in the report. So let me see if I can pull up those pages. No, actually, I'm not going to even try, because that's probably going to take up too much of my time. But if you go into the annual report and you click through, you will, and it's I think page 3. I've got a big picture of Meg Whitman here. So let's pass it very quickly, because that's not information that is useful in assessing corporate governance. But if you go to page 3 of the annual report, and I'm just scrolling down through this to get to that page, you'll see the members of the board. Okay? So it lists out the names of the members, it lists out the age, so Mark Andreessen is right on top. It lists the age of the director, it lists out how long they've been directors. It gives you a little bit of a background. Again, it's not the most, it's PR, it's not going to give you the bad stuff about these directors, but it's a useful place to start. So I got that right off the HP website, so I pulled up the 10K, and right off the HP website, I also pulled off that Def 14A that I talked about that's filed with the SEC. So this is the place where you can go to find out information about directors, about conflicts of interest. So this actually, again, I pulled off the HP website. Incidentally, any SEC filing, you also can pull off the website for the SEC website, and the SEC website looks like this. So basically it's sec.gov. So go into the SEC website, and there's a big button on the right which says search for company filings. When you click there, this is the page that'll pop up. Type in HP or Hewlett Packard, and all of the filings made by the company over time should be there. So you can find 10Ks, 10Qs, 14 devs, any filing with the SEC. Take advantage of it. For non-US companies, as I said, the job's a little more difficult, but it's not that much more difficult. Okay? Incidentally, this site is also, it's also the place you go. You can also get more information, and this is an access you have as an MBA that I think you should use. It's a Capital IQ site. Every Stern MBA has access to it. They might require you to jump through a few hoops, get a password. Get it if you can. You're paying a lot of money for this MBA. This is one of the few bonuses you get in return. So this is what the S&P Capital IQ site looks like. Here's what you need to do. Click on companies, go into the top and type in HPQ. Now you can type in the symbol, you can type in the name of the company. It's pretty forgiving. Then once I find the company, I'm going to click on it. And here's the magic. Remember we talked about corporate governance? If you look down the left-hand side, it says company summary, and the bottom one says corporate governance. Click on that. Okay. So here's what will pop up. Okay. It's an amazing amount of information, inside information, that otherwise you would have had to spend an incredible amount of resources pulling up. It gives you information about corporate governance. It gives you information about how you change the company bylaws. It gives you information about directors, how you amend bylaws. It also, if you keep going, tells you something about, it gives you things about, you can find out information here about takeover amendments. And essentially, it's a very rich database of information that is useful to you as a stockholder in assessing the company. Okay? So see if you can pull this up for your company. And while you're here, you might want to pull up the information, since you're already here, on 10 or 15 other companies in the sector. It'll give you a comparison that you can make to make a judgment on whether your company is in fact strong on corporate governance or weak on corporate governance. So let's summarize. To try to address the question of corporate governance in your company, keep your eyes on the big questions. How much power do you have as a stockholder in the company? Is the game tilted against you? To answer those questions, start with the raw data. Start with the annual report, the 10K, the 10Q, all the filings of the SEC. But cast your net wide. Go to Capital IQ, pull up information about your company. But remember, this is all raw data directed to help you answer that big question. The big question is, how much power do I as a stockholder have in this company? I hope this helped you try to answer that question. Thank you for listening.